So are there questions? Yeah.
So I have two esoteric questions.
Okay.
The first is the first set of studies that you described were the ones with the offspring of panic.
Yeah.
But it's my understanding that the pathophysiology of panic is really different than it is for the other types of anxiety disorders that you went on to describe and with whom the offspring that you talked about. So for example, if you think about the amygdala findings and you think about the attention bias findings, they're really not found in panic as opposed to the other types of anxiety disorders. So I'm wondering, given that, how you think about those first findings, because it seems to me that in the subsequent studies, you're getting the relation between the other types of anxiety in the parent and behavioral inhibition.
I don't really know. I mean, the reason that there's a history to why they decided to study panic first, but it is a question why we found, because it was really high rates of BI in those offspring. And the only thing I can think of, and I'm not sure this really explains it, is that Jerry Kagan, in classifying BI, dichotomized the sample into two. And the control kids in the sample were relatives of kids with ADHD who have a tendency to have behavioral disinhibition. And I don't know if that somehow offset and elevated artificially the rate of BI in those kids. That's one hypothesis. I mean, when you look at the text, I mean, Jerry Kagan all along was saying these kids are as inhibited, you know, they're making as few comments, but there may have been something slightly different. There was no peer play, so it may, that would be one guess I would have.
So my second esoteric question has to do with the longitudinal findings from Jerry's sample about the incidence of psychopathology in the sample, and particularly the incidence of parental psychopathology in the sample. So the reason it's an esoteric question is because other people may not be aware that Jerry has a number of different longitudinal cohorts. One of those longitudinal cohorts, and I don't know if that was the one that in the data that you presented.
Ours was the pearls. He names them after gemstones.
Yeah, I know, but I don't remember which one was the one that was recruited like ours at 4 months of age.
No, that's the one that Carl is imaging now, the other one that Carl is imaging.
So, because there's a difference in the recruitment process, obviously, in terms of whether or not, you know, when you show those sort of Venn diagrams with the behavioral inhibition, and the number of kids who are overrepresented with parental psychopathology. I can see that for the kids who are recruited at age 2 or 3, and then you ask the parents, is my kid shy? But with the 4-month-olds, it's a harder story to describe in terms of the screening and finding them to be high motor and high negative affect, and them having parents who have that same incidence of psychopathology.
Right. I mean, I'm not aware if anyone has done parental. Do you know if Jerry or Carl or anybody has done?
I was hoping you would.
Yeah, no, I don't know. But I do know that sometimes, like, does it matter that then, I mean, I know the recruitment of that sample, but then from that sample, if you look at inhibition, and I don't know exactly what he does, but if you then take the inhibited children as what you're, because maybe when Carl's imaging, I don't know if he's going by high reactivity or by inhibition, would that matter or would it not?
Well, it wouldn't matter in terms of the child's status as behaviorally inhibited or not, but it would matter for the parent in terms of, I was just referring to the issue about parental psychopathology, linked.
Right. Well, let's pretend parental psychopathology isn't linked at all to reactivity, but let's pretend it's linked to inhibition at age 2. Because, I mean, Susan Warren did one study with offspring of parents and didn't find higher rates of either. And I think it was 4 months and 14 months. So, but let's pretend it is linked at age 2. If you're using age 2 as your predictor, then maybe what you're getting at is parental. I don't really know, I guess, but.
I was just hoping that maybe you can do that, whether they did that. My third was just a comment, which is that in the data that I presented yesterday on incidence of psychopathology in our sample, particularly in anxiety disorders and social phobia, it was only by a parent report. When we looked at observed behavioral inhibition, we found nothing. No relation to psychopathology and or to anxiety disorders or to social phobia.
That's very interesting. And we don't have, that's the problem with different, because we don't have parent reports, so we couldn't look, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Very nice talk. In some of your earlier data slides, you found that social anxiety was highest in the offspring in kids who had BI. So you had offspring and non-offspring
Right.
Of parents with psychopathology, and then you had those kids each group divided by BI or not BI. And if I'm remembering correctly, the highest rates of that combined social avoidance and social anxiety were highest in offspring and BI. But there also was a fairly high rate in the offspring who weren't high BI. So
Right, because
there was kind of nothing going on there. And I guess this was much earlier. I guess my question is, how do you understand those high rates? Because I think it was around 12 to 15% rate of these social anxiety or social phobia disorders.
Yeah.
Like one of those.
Yeah.
How do you understand that rate of 19%?
Because they're offspring of parents with panic and depression, and so they're at elevated risk for social phobia anyway, is one explanation. I can give you a more...
But not by the route of PI, I guess.
Right. That's another whole point that I don't think I have time to make, is that BI is not the only route to get to social phobia. And we had these weird findings that I actually took out of the talk, where basically at the older age of assessment, at age 10, and if you look in just the offspring of panic, the disinhibited kids also have elevated rates of social phobia. I took it out. I don't know quite what to make of it. I mean, if you look at, it's really quite striking. It's like the inhibited kids and the disinhibited kids, but not the in-between kids, have higher rates of social phobia by age 10. And there have been some papers recently about like weird subtypes of social phobia in the National Comorbidity Study, for example, where they find that among adults with social phobia in the general population, 79% have characteristics suggestive of BI, but 21% have characteristics suggestive of disinhibition. They're risk prone. They take sexual risks. They do substance abuse at a higher rate. They're more aggressive. So I think that there's definitely another pathway that we don't understand where disinhibition leads to social phobia. And I don't know if it's because any kind of dysregulation in a child's approach to novelty at a young age can ultimately predispose them to get social phobia. It's like a biological argument. Or if it's that the kids who act really disinhibited get so much negative feedback from everyone around them that by the time they get to an age where they can start to think about what others think about them, which is somewhere between 6 and 10, they develop this idea that they are afraid of scrutiny of others.